It's complicated. Alright, let's talk about Gaza. It's a tiny strip of land about twice the size of Washington, D.C., but with a lot more history and honestly a lot less fun. Imagine living in a place where getting basic things like clean water, medicine, or even building materials is incredibly difficult. That, in a nutshell, is the situation in Gaza because of something called a blockade. Think of it as a very strict, very long-term you can't come in and you can't go out policy, enforced by its neighbors, Israel and Egypt. This isn't just a simple border fence, it's a complex system of restrictions on land, sea and air that has been in place for years, and it affects every single person living there. To understand how we got here, we need to hop into our historical time machine. Let's set the dial to 1948. After the war that led to the creation of the State of Israel, many Palestinians who lost their homes fled to Gaza, which was then controlled by Egypt. Fast forward to 1967, and the Six-Day War happens. Israel captures Gaza from Egypt, along with the West Bank and East Jerusalem. For decades, Israel occupies Gaza, building settlements and controlling the lives of the Palestinians living there. This period was filled with tension, uprisings, and a growing sense of frustration among Palestinians. Then, in 2005, something big happens. Israel decides to disengage from Gaza. This meant they pulled out all of their soldiers and evacuated the thousands of Israeli settlers living there. However, Israel still controlled Gaza's borders, its airspace, and its coastline. It was like being given the keys to your house, but someone else has locked all the doors and windows from the outside. The real turning point came in 2006. Palestine held elections, and to the surprise of many, Hamas won a majority in the Palestinian parliament. By 2007, Hamas had taken full control of Gaza. In response, Israel, with Egypt's cooperation, tightened its control over the borders, and the full-scale blockade as we know it today began. So who are the big shots with the power to actually change things in Gaza? First and foremost, you have to look at Israel. As the country directly enforcing most of the blockade, Israel holds the most direct power. Any decision to ease or lift the restrictions on goods and people moving in and out of Gaza ultimately has to go through the Israeli government. Next up, we have Egypt. Egypt controls the Rafah crossing, which is Gaza's only border that doesn't go through Israel. This makes Egypt a crucial player. For a long time, Egypt has kept the Rafah crossing mostly closed, partly due to its own security concerns about militant groups in the Sinai Peninsula and its complicated relationship with Hamas. Then there's the United States. As Israel's most powerful ally, the United States has enormous influence. It provides billions of dollars in military aid to Israel every year. If a United States president decides to put serious pressure on Israel to change its policies, it could be a game changer. They are the friend with, honestly, a lot of sway. Finally, you have other important groups and countries. The United Nations, through its agencies like UNRWA, provides essential aid like food and education to a huge portion of Gaza's population. Regional powers like Qatar and Turkey have also played roles, often by providing financial aid to Gaza or trying to mediate between Hamas and Israel. All these players have different levels of influence, but together, they form a complex web of power that keeps the situation locked in place, or could, potentially, unlock it. Over the years, there have been many attempts to fix this mess, and most of them have, unfortunately, ended up like a failed IKEA project with a lot of frustration and spare parts that don't seem to fit anywhere. One of the most common approaches has been the ceasefire agreement. After each major round of fighting, mediators, usually from Egypt, Qatar, or the United Nations, rush in to broker a truce. These agreements typically involve Hamas promising to stop firing rockets and Israel promising to ease the blockade. For a little while it works, the violence stops and maybe Israel allows a few more trucks of goods into Gaza. The problem is that these ceasefires are usually just temporary fixes, like putting a small bandage on a massive wound. They don't address the root causes of the conflict. Another strategy has been economic peace. The idea here is that if you can improve the economy in Gaza and give people jobs and opportunities, they will be less likely to support violence. For instance, Qatar has often provided millions of dollars in cash payments to poor families and to pay the salaries of government workers in Gaza. While this provides temporary relief, it doesn't solve the core political problem. Finally, there have been grand, ambitious attempts at a comprehensive peace deal, like the Oslo Accords in the 1990s. These were aimed at creating a two-state solution, but these talks have repeatedly failed. Both sides blame each other. These big peace plans have failed because of a massive lack of trust and the unwillingness of leaders on both sides to make the painful compromises needed for a lasting peace. As of today, July 29, 2025, the situation in Gaza remains incredibly tense and fragile. The blockade is still very much in effect, and the humanitarian conditions are, honestly, just dire. The United Nations recently published another report highlighting the severe shortages of electricity, clean water, and medical supplies. Most homes in Gaza only get power for a few hours a day, and the tap water is largely undrinkable. Hospitals are struggling to perform surgeries and treat patients because they lack basic equipment and medicine. Unemployment is still sky high, especially among young people, creating a deep sense of despair. On the political front, things are, well, stuck. The Israeli government continues to state that the blockade is a non-negotiable security requirement. Meanwhile, Hamas remains in control of Gaza, rejecting calls to disarm and continuing to defy Israel. The internal Palestinian division between Hamas in Gaza and the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority in the West Bank also continues. Internationally, there's a lot of talk, but not much action. The Biden administration continues to call for a two-state solution but has not put significant pressure on Israel to lift the blockade. Everyone is living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the next explosion, while the international community seems content to just manage the crisis instead of resolving it. It's a deeply unsustainable situation that everyone knows can't last forever. To truly understand this conflict, you have to look through two very different windows. From the Israeli window, especially for someone living in a town like Sderot or Ashkelon near the Gaza border, life involves a constant, underlying anxiety. The sound of a siren means you have about 15 seconds to run to a bomb shelter before a rocket fired from Gaza might land. Schools, bus stops, and even playgrounds are built with reinforced concrete. For them, the blockade is not a theoretical concept. It's what they believe keeps them safe from Hamas, a group whose charter calls for Israel's destruction. From this perspective, the conversation is all about security. When they hear calls to end the blockade, their first thought is often, but what about the rockets? What will stop Hamas from importing more dangerous weapons? For many Israelis, lifting the blockade without disarming Hamas feels like an existential threat. Now, let's look through the Palestinian window in Gaza. For a young person growing up there, life is defined by limits. Your dream of studying at a university abroad is nearly impossible because you can't get a permit to leave. If you get sick with a complex illness, you might not be able to get the treatment you need because the hospitals lack equipment and you can't easily travel to a better hospital in Jerusalem or Egypt. You see the sea every day, but you can only fish a few miles out before you risk being shot at by Israeli patrol boats. The sky is a source of fear, not because of rockets, but because of the constant buzz of Israeli drones. From this viewpoint, the blockade is the source of almost all suffering. People will tell you about the frustration of not being able to find a job, the struggle to provide for their families, and the feeling of being trapped and forgotten by the world. The world is not quiet about the Gaza blockade, it's just very divided. Different countries and organizations look at the same situation and come to wildly different conclusions. The United States, for example, has consistently been Israel's strongest supporter. At the United Nations, the United States has frequently used its veto power in the Security Council to shield Israel from resolutions that condemn its actions. In contrast, a large part of the international community, especially in Europe, has a more critical view of the blockade. The European Union officially considers the blockade to be a collective punishment and has repeatedly called for it to be lifted. However, the European Union is not a single entity. Its member states have different opinions. This division means that while the European Union makes strong statements and provides humanitarian aid, it struggles to take decisive political action. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are among the most vocal critics. They have published numerous reports documenting what they call war crimes committed by both Israel and Hamas. Many countries in the global south, particularly in the Arab and Muslim world, are strongly supportive of the Palestinian cause and view the blockade as a clear injustice. However, recent normalization agreements between some Arab countries and Israel have shifted regional dynamics. So, after all this, we're back to the big question. Can anyone actually end the Gaza blockade? The simple and frustrating answer is yes, but it requires the will to act from those who hold the power. The facts are clear. The power to physically lift the blockade lies primarily with two countries, Israel, which controls the land, sea, and air access, and Egypt, which controls the vital Rafah crossing. However, these governments do not operate in a vacuum. The United States has a unique and unmatched ability to influence Israel's decisions. As Israel's main provider of security aid and diplomatic protection, a firm and sustained demand from Washington would be a true game changer. Other international and regional powers, including the European Union, Qatar, and Turkey, also have important roles to play. They can use their diplomatic and economic influence to create incentives for peace. Ultimately, ending the blockade requires a clear sequence of events. First, the key international players, led by the United States, must decide that the current situation is unacceptable and unsustainable. Second, they must use their collective influence to broker a long-term agreement that guarantees both Israeli security and Palestinian freedom of movement and economic opportunity. It's an incredibly difficult task, but it is not impossible. The power to change the future for millions of people exists. It is just waiting to be used.